denomination. Oh, wow.
That's
a new feature.
Yeah,
Good.
we got it.
I'm glad it's being recorded because I'm going to have to leave early soon.
Okay.
So, good.
Yeah. Well, I'll get it up. I'll probably put the video up tomorrow, Marlena. So.
That's like making a call to customer service, and they say, by the way, this call will be recorded, so don't cuss.
Exactly. This may end up on the internet at some point.
Yes, or in trial.
Yeah, right. This may or may not be used as evidence against you in a court of law. Okay, so today we are going to look at the Moravian Church and the American Baptist Church, two very different denominations, but sharing similarities. So this will officially round out the mainline denominations. We will have covered them all. So check that one off your box. Okay, so let's start with the Moravian Church. Same question as always. Any pre-knowledge or encounters at all?
I did wonder if there was any in Oregon, Portland, or the Northwest, or the West Coast. And the map showed 4: 1 in Seattle, 2 in California, and the whole East Coast is filled.
Yep. And there's some churches in Alaska too, apparently.
Okay, I missed that.
There's like 22 congregations in Alaska or something like that.
I've never even heard of such a thing.
Me either.
Well, you're learning something today.
Yeah.
Well, and the one in Seattle is not it's a fellowship house. It's not a it's not a full parish.
So drop that one.
It's basically like a friends meeting, from what I can understand.
Because
if you look up the address on Google Maps, it points at a residential address.
I did hit the button, but interesting.
Yeah. Any history, interaction, pre-knowledge other than your?
Well, coming from my Anabaptist background, I was always under the assumption that we had shared roots. And when I poked into it a little bit just now, I saw that was not necessarily the case.
No. In fact, this was one of the eye openers for me, is realizing the historicity of the Moravian Church. Well, that's the wrong word in this case, but so many scholars actually consider the Moravian Church the first Protestant church, predating Lutheranism even. And I kind of spoiled that a little bit last week. So any other things, or I'll launch right into the history of it and we'll go. All right. So John Hus, everybody remember who that is? Or should I do it quick? So John Hus was a Bohemian, aka Czech/German, that region of the world. And he, 100 years before Martin Luther, took issue with the Catholic Church, and coincidentally had essentially the same exact issues as Luther ended up having. So Luther, it turns out, is a poser. he stole everything from John Hus. No, I mean subtly different, but not really subtly. In fact, pretty much the same exact issues. So he was in full support of church services being in Czech, in other words, in the local language, not in Latin. He thought that people should be able to receive communion in both kinds, so not just the bread, but the wine also. He thought that priests should be married. Go figure. He wanted to get rid of indulgences and purgatory. Sound familiar? So Hus preached in and around Bohemia, and actually gained support from the Crown of Bohemia, the royal leadership in that area. But his Reformation was cut short. So he was summoned to the Council of Constance, which was in 1415? Yeah. And we covered a little bit of this when we did our Reformation history, but so he was summoned to attend the Council of Constance. And of course, he naively went there thinking this was his opportunity to, forward his Reformation ideas to the Catholic Church. But instead, they condemned him as a heretic and burned him at the stake.
Why do we laugh? It's just so crazy.
It is. It's awful. It's awful.
Yes, it is. It's awful.
But the old summon them to the council trick always gets those reformers.
Yeah, beware.
Yeah. So he got burned at the stake, and then what followed were actually a series of wars between the Hussites and various Catholic rulers. So between 1420 or 1419 and 1437, there were a series of skirmishes, which kind of culminated in the defeat of a group called the Utraquists, which were the Hussites. Or sorry, no, they were the Catholics. The Utraquists defeated the Taborites, and that ended the Hussite wars. So then things kind of, at least according to our eyes, were, went away until Luther came on the scene. But in reality, basically a contingent of Hussites, contingent of followers of Huss, lived in secret in Bohemia and continued to practice the Hussite ideals. And so when Luther comes on the scene, suddenly they kind of resurfaced because it was now less bad to be a Protestant. So this is why, by the way, many will argue that the Moravian Church, which we'll get to why it's called the Moravian Church in a little bit, is the original Protestant church. So what happens is that they kind of come out of the woodwork, like I said, in the middle of the 16th century. They essentially show up. Okay, well, hold on. I gotta get my dates right here. Compact of Basel, Gregory. Yeah. Man, where did that one go? And whatever, it doesn't matter. So they show up and participate in the Reformation movement. But it is short-lived, unfortunately, because well, okay, let me describe what happens. So they get a bit of a resurgence along with the Protestant Reformation. They are profoundly accepted in their region, and like one of the really cool things is that they're hugely influential in this small area of the Bohemian Crown. They become responsible for the majority of schools being built in the region, and there are estimates that as many as 90% of the inhabitants of Bohemia were Hussites at this point in time. So this is like mid 16th century, so like 20, 30, 40 years after Luther, right? Well, not 30, 40 years, 30, 40 years after Luther, after 1517, the Theses on the Wall and all that jazz. So up through the end of the 16th century, Hussite faith was alive and well and thriving in Bohemia, and has interactions with Lutheranism, and well, I'm jumping ahead in the timeline. Okay, but here's what happens. Is because the Hussites controlled the majority of education in the region, and kind of apparently the breaking point was that they became hugely influential in the University of Prague. The Catholic Church moved in to kick them out. So the Catholic Church essentially invited the Jesuits into the region, and the Jesuits forced out all of the Protestant schools, to make a long story short. And at the end of the day, what happened then was in 1617, the new Bohemian emperor ended up being Catholic. The new Bohemian king ended up being Catholic instead of kind of a Protestant sympathizer, and that was the beginning of the end. And so then what happened was the Bohemians led the Bohemian Revolt, which, as with all these battles, ended up poorly for the Protestants, and they were profoundly defeated. All the leaders were executed, and then what happens is the region suffers greatly due to war, plague, and other stuff. So like this region where the Protestants were goes from about 3 million folks down to 800,000 in just maybe 20 years, due to plague. I mean, so like, wow. I mean, basically a genocide of that population. So then what happens is they go underground again. So they kind of disperse across the Low Counties up into Northern Europe. And there is leadership during this time but again, it's underground. So they refer to themselves during this time as the hidden seed. So it's the seed of folks that is waiting for their opportunity to grow and blossom. So the point at which they then again kind of spring forward isn't until the 18th century, so about 100 years later. And what happens is these folks who had been living in northern Moravia kind of come out of the woodwork, and they show up at the estate of a prominent nobleman who had been really in support of Lutheran pietism. And his name was Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. What a fantastic name. So they show up and they basically say to him, hey, here we are. We're the remnants of this tradition that's been hiding out. Here are our commitments. We're committed to helping the poor and needy, which falls in line with his Lutheran pietism. And we are requesting of you basically a land in which we can settle and practice our faith without being persecuted. And so they ended up settling in Upper Lusatia, which is modern day Eastern Germany. And they live there in relative peace. The town grows and grows and grows. Interestingly, what happens is as they become official, they end up having quite a bit of internal conflict over, what was the right practice of their faith. And so Zinzendorf is forced to step in and mediate some of their conflict. And this continues over the course of a year. And then there's an ecstatic moment. So 13th of August, 1727, apparently the entire community has what they refer to as a divine transformation following the visitation of the Holy Spirit. And they quote unquote learned to love one another. And this idea of mutual love is core to Moravian understanding. And we'll get back to that when we talk about their faith practices and whatnot. So this marks kind of the revival period then of what was originally the Hussite Church, but is now, nominally the Moravian Church. And so over the next 10-ish years, they expand where the Moravian teachings expand beyond this one village called Herrnhut, and they begin establishing other Moravian communities around the area. And coincidentally, Zinzendorf becomes one of the first bishops of what they referred to as the renewed unity of the Moravian Church. Some important things that happened during this time. They establish a shared communication called daily watchwords. Has anybody heard of that? It's one of the most widely distributed daily devotionals, believe it or not.
It's not connected to the Watchtower, is it?
No, that's Jehovah's Witness.
Right, okay.
No, yeah. Daily Watchwords is essentially a daily devotional that the Moravian Church makes available internationally. And when I say widely distributed, I mean the number of countries that it's distributed to, not necessarily the number of distributions. Like I said, they expand to almost 30 settlements. We'll get to that in a second. Oh, here's the other interesting thing is that apparently so kind of one of the core ideas was obviously this mutual love. They were very much kind of an Acts 2 church, and that they essentially bordered on socialism. So one of their core ideas was that there would be no extreme wealth nor extreme poverty. And so there was a lot of sharing of resources. You had personal ownership of things, but and I don't really know the mechanism by which all this happened, but essentially they didn't want anybody in their community to be more wealthy or verging on poverty. So they did something to make sure that didn't happen. But then the other piece was that, again, this is an ideal that's founded on the idea of unity. And so they set up continuous prayer that ran 24 hours a day, praying for the unity of the Christian church that ran for over 100 years. So they had 24-hour round-the-clock prayer every, 24/7, 365, that apparently, ran for about 100 years.
That's adorable and lovely.
I know it's really hard for me not to convert to Moravianism after learning about these folks. So one of the things that is unique, well, remarkable about the Moravian Church is they are actually the first Protestant body to do missionary work. Now, again, we are not in the era of colonial missionary work yet, if that makes sense. So this isn't going into, the uncivilized lands to bring, religiosity to the fuzzy wuzzies. This is truly, apparently, truly comes out of the desire for everybody to experience the love that they experience in their Moravian unity. Again, I'm guessing that a lot of this history is being written by the Moravians. So I don't have secondary sources to back that up, but I like the idea of it. So I'm going to go with that. That was what inspired their missionary work. But as a result, despite them not having huge numbers, they end up going all over the place. And so they would set up renewal groups in different parts of at this time, mainly Europe, but later on worldwide. And they referred to them as Diaspora Societies. So essentially it's folks who have gone out, who have established themselves in these areas and are, literally trying to bring unity and love to this region. And if you go on like the Wikipedia page, you can see all the different areas. But, one of the things that is unique, well, not necessarily unique, but important, and for what we're going to talk about today is that they end up founding a lot of missionary communities in the New Americas, specifically directed towards the native peoples of the American colonies at this point. And they actually found missions in the Algonquin-speaking Mohicans. So, Daniel Day-Lewis apparently was one of their early converts. I'm sorry, that was a bad Last of the Mohicans joke. So like I said, they found a bunch of missions in the 13 colonies. One of the most recognizable missions ends up being kind of like the center of their activity. And they found a whole town that they call Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Has anybody heard of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Yeah, it's the 7th largest city in Pennsylvania. Go figure. So that was a Moravian town, believe it or not. And that was funded by Count Zinzendorf. They settled in Puxatawney too, one of my favorite Pennsylvanian words. North Carolina, Georgia, kind of, basically the 13 colonies. And of course, other places in the world too, Australia, South Africa, Greenland, believe it or not, they established a church in Greenland. And then the rest is history, so to speak. They are somewhat affected by the Civil War. So a couple of their churches were forced to close because of violence as a result of the Civil War, but it was temporary closures. Yeah, that's it in terms of history. Any questions thus far? Comments, thoughts?
I've comment. I also looked at Wikipedia, and there's some really interesting stuff on there. But what I was taken by the spirit of the Moravian Church. The 5 characteristics of the Moravian is simplicity.
Yep.
And it talks about what they mean by simplicity.
Yep.
Happiness.
Yep.
Is number 2, and it talks about what they mean by happiness. Unintrusiveness. I like that. And they talk about that, and then a fellowship. And the ideal of service entails. Anyway, yeah, the Wikipedia page is kind of amazing.
It's so also if you have a couple of minutes, go onto the Moravian Church website. It's just moravian.org. And was it on the front page? But if you click on the tab "What We Believe," there's a video that you can watch, which is amazing. It's really well done. It's short and basically it's just a bunch of members of the Moravian Church talking about what the Moravian Church means to them. And I'm telling you, If you don't want to convert to Moravianism at the end of that video, I don't know.
Yeah.
Why haven't they moved out here? I wonder why they
Oh,
haven't.
We'll get to that. Well, but there's no to answer your question, Marlena. There's no concrete answers. But one of the things that I've discovered, we'll talk about this when we get to the American Baptist Church as well too, is that apparently progressive Christianity is not super popular, historically speaking. It will become very evident when we look at the Triennial Convention split for the Baptist Church.
I'd like to one more thing we're paying. The motto, do you know the motto of the church?
Yeah.
The motto in essence, unity, in essence, oh no, in
Essentials, unity.
unity, in non-essentials, liberty, in all things, love.
Yeah.
Cool motto.
That is the best summary of Protestantism I've ever heard. Sorry, or I can post it in chat so you guys can read it too.
Okay.
It's extremely but then also their other motto.
That was also on the page of the Scott Campbell group
Ah,
when we did that section. So,
Was it really?
Yeah. So I think those guys stole it from the Moravians.
The method. Well, but okay, but no. So here's the thing: is that if you recall, Wesley attended a Moravian church before he went on to found the Methodist Church. He totally sniped it from the Moravians. And then when Wesley came over, the Methodists influenced what becomes the UCC, DOC, that whole vein. So yeah.
This is an ecumenical statement.
It is. Absolutely. That's why I say this is one of the best summaries of what Protestantism should be. But their other motto is, which I also think is fantastic, is "Our Lamb has conquered, let us follow him." You took out the gendered language, I think it'd be better, but it's still our lamb, as in the lamb who was slain. Yeah, our lamb has conquered. Which yeah, that's great. I mean,
hey, we've got to get a motto.
I know, right? What's the ELCA's motto? I don't know. God's work our hands has been.
There we go. Yeah, that works.
Jesse,
Yeah.
did Martin Luther know of the Moravians?
Yeah, I mean, there was some interaction. Here's the issue, though, is that the Moravian movement during Luther's time was still essentially underground. It isn't until mid 16th century that they kind of come out of the woodwork.
Mhm.
And then they get shut down right away, mainly because of the control that they had in schools, and the Catholic Church didn't like that. Also, well, that's an interesting question actually, because I'm looking at it kind of from an academic, literary standpoint, but I don't know if we have like records of communication between Luther and any Moravians during this time. I mean, I know for a fact that Luther was influenced by and aware of John Hus. He absolutely knew of Hus, and may or may not have adapted many of his ideas from him, but yeah.
The Moravian Synod also allowed gay members to marry as well as clergy.
Yep.
In 2018.
Yep. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The Moravian Church is quite. I mean, I would say polity theology wise is basically perhaps a little bit more progressive than the ELCA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In 2014, they allowed ordination of gays and lesbians. 2014.
Yep. Good folks.
It's still late.
What else? Oh, there was, okay. Okay, let's talk. Anything else here before we move on? So let's talk kind of like present day core things about the Moravian Church. So it continues to be a rather minor denomination, which is why there aren't churches out in the West Coast. So about 1.2 million members worldwide total. So worldwide, right? And actually the biggest Moravian congregations are in Africa. About 907,000 of their membership is in Africa. And in fact, in North America, the Moravian Church membership is only about 40,000 people.
They're evangelical.
So this is why there aren't any Moravian communities in the West Coast. It's just not a large North American movement. And if you think about it, it's probably because of their missionary nature. And I should probably emphasize that more, is that the idea of their missionary work of, expanding God's love to the world is kind of core to their understanding of what they're about. But another important thing to understand, and it's in the motto that Jim was referencing, is that they're very much even going beyond tolerant model of missionary work. So their motivation is not necessarily to convert. It's very much kind of a pure evangelist understanding of like their role is to proclaim God's love, not to make people Moravians, which is self-defeating in terms of like creating a large successful denomination. But if their goal truly is just to proclaim God's love to the world, then why not? I'm not against it. Some interesting things. So this is another thing I'm curious about. If Wesley stole this from the Moravians, is that they also practice the love feast. So that's one of their. You remember us talking about the love feast, which once a month or once a quarter they'd get together and share a meal, and it was basically kind of like an expanded version of communion. Did anybody read about how Moravian cemeteries are laid out?
No.
This is fascinating. So they have what they refer to as God's acre. But again, this kind of sense of equality is built into their understanding that in God's acre there are no prominent tombstones. They're all horizontal, so it basically looks like cobblestones laid in a gridlocking pattern. And they may have and they have like the names inscribed on them, but no stone is bigger than another stone. And they all kind of like, interlock to form essentially this path. And so the idea is that you are equal in life, you are equal in death. There is no hierarchy. And I don't know, that's pretty slick. Probably cheaper too than a lot of our modern burial practices. So and also you're not, and this may be controversial, but when you find where your stone goes, it's not organized by family. It's organized according to sex, age, and marital status.
Oh,
So yeah, I don't know about that one. What else? We already talked about their thing. Well, and this is worth mentioning is that so one of the things that denominations share in common is that we've all had fractures or splits, over the course of our history, ELCA, Lutheran Church included. The Moravian Church as well, it was not immune to that. But what's significant is that when these splits occurred, they didn't leave the Moravian unity. So for example, in Haiti and where was the other area? Haiti and the Czech Republic, there was a significant split amongst those areas there after some charismatic revivals that happened. But post-split, both newly formed unities maintained their membership as part of the Moravian Church. They just agreed to disagree and still function in the same area. Other things, again, these people are they seem pretty great. So they run, since 1867 have run a rehabilitation center in Ramallah, Palestine. Originally, it started out as a leper colony, but since then it has been converted as a home for handicapped children of the Arab population in Palestine. So last thing is their organization is interesting. So it's not hierarchical per se, but it is kind of hierarchical in that there's the kind of the top level of organization is called a unity. And it's not necessarily the unity isn't the umbrella. Unity is just saying this is a big gathering of Moravians. And so the unity is the major unit, and then where did it go? Unities, mission areas, and mission provinces. So it's unity, mission province, mission area. And so it's more has to do with just like the general organization. So mission provinces report to unities, mission areas report to mission provinces. Yeah. All right. Any question, conversation about the Moravians? Or we'll move on to the ABC. Cool.
Well, I like,
Yeah, they're pretty great. Also, their synod gatherings are only once every 7 years.
How do they organize their clergy?
That's a good question. I don't know. So I mean, ordained ministry is very similar to mainline Protestantism. You need a master of divinity. Sounds like you essentially go through a mentorship program where you're placed under the mentorship of an acting pastor, and then you kind of like eventually get your own church after that. But there isn't much information about that. Well, sorry, I keep saying last things. So here are their confessional documents. The three creeds: Apostles, Nicene, Athanasian, Augsburg Confession, Confession of Unity of the Bohemian Brethren, the Barmen Declaration, Small Catechism of Luther, Heidelberg Catechism, 39 Articles of the Church of England, and the Synod of Bern. So they accept all of those statements of or creedal statements. But it sounds like they accept all of them, but don't require all of them, if that makes sense. Okay, great. Let's talk American Baptist Church. So, same question. Any interaction with the ABC?
How,
so.
go ahead.
Jim, go.
Oh, no, I was just gonna ask, ABC versus all the other Baptists.
We will get there. It's actually a pretty simple history. Yeah. Jill, what were you going to ask?
I was going to say I have multiple experiences with Baptists,
Yeah.
including what probably was about a year and a half of adult ed, going to an ABC, maybe. But Baptists are crazy because there's so many of them, and
yes,
I can't really say much about that.
Yeah.
My experience with Baptists was I had a best friend in junior high school and high school who was from Birmingham, Alabama, and she was a Baptist. And she invited me to Baptist revivals, but my mother wouldn't allow me to go.
And that would have probably been an SBC revival, Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, Southern Baptist, right?
Yeah. Any other thoughts or experiences? So one thing important to point out, and Mel, you might appreciate this, is that Baptist and Anabaptist are not necessarily synonymical. They're not synonymous. There are distinct traditions that come out of that. You could probably make the argument that Baptists and Anabaptists come out of the same place theologically, but there are significant points of departure, especially when we come to modern expressions of that. Okay, let's talk American Baptist Church. So to trace the history of the American Baptist Church, you have to go obviously pre-American Baptist Church. So we'll go all the way back to 1638. So in 1638, a guy named Roger Williams founds the first Baptist church in America, and it's in, believe it or not, Providence, Rhode Island. So you can still go visit the site of the first Baptist church, but I don't believe it's the original building. I think that one is a reconstruction at this point.
Wasn't he the governor of Rhode Island?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so. No, I don't believe so. No, he was just a theologian. I wonder. Well, now I'm curious. Nicholas Cook was the first governor of Rhode Island. Wait, no. There was a Roger Williams.
Right.
Maybe it's the same guy. It was. Oh, man, Susan, you know your Rhode Island history. It's funny because if you look up Roger Williams, that is not the first thing that's listed. They talk about his religious background, but failed to mention that he was officially the first lieutenant governor of Rhode Island. In fact, it's not even in the opening summary paragraph. Well, that's craziness. Thank you for that. Okay, so Roger Williams, first lieutenant governor of Rhode Island.
Might be a different one though, because it says here that he was a Puritan minister, theologian, and author.
That's the same guy.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No. So Roger Williams leaves the British leaves Britain specifically because of what he perceived as religious persecution and out of a desire for religious separatism. So essentially, we talked about this when we talked about the history of the Church of England, was because the Church of England kind of became synonymous with the state of England. Much of the Protestant resistance to the Church of England was a desire to maintain a separation between church and state. And so Williams, being a separatist, that was one of the major things that influenced him to move across the ocean. So apparently he was banished to the New England wilderness. Whether or not he was banished or whether or not he decided to just jump ship and get over here, I don't know. I'd have to look at more into the history of Roger Williams. But he is the founder of the state of Rhode Island and the founder of the First Baptist Church. So he gets there in 1636, founds the First Baptist Church in America in 1638. And then over the course of the next 30-ish years, you get several more Baptist churches being founded in that region. And so essentially where they arrive at is, and again, keep in mind that these are all separatist, hugely congregationalist people, right? So again, remember the system that they're coming out of, this enforced unity of you will because if you remember, this was an issue that the Methodists had, is that in order to belong to the Church of England, you also had to acknowledge the monarch of England as being head of the church, which you can imagine caused no short order of conflict. So what you get is this hugely congregational polity amongst all of these different Baptist churches that are planted in the new colonies. And so they form what is referred to as the Triennial Convention, which is called the Triennial Convention because they meet once every 3 years. And so the main thing that the Triennial Convention is responsible for is essentially helping churches to organize themselves, fund themselves, and then deploy missionaries into the new colonies. So they found Brown University is one of the outcomes of the Triennial Convention. And anything else I want to mention there? And so this Triennial Convention essentially maintains its stuff up through 1845. Okay, and here we go. Here is the fun history of the Baptist Church in America. So in 1845, the years leading into the Civil War, the Triennial Convention splits, and it splits down north-south lines. So the Southern congregations in the Triennial Convention revolt because the Triennial Convention passes a decision saying that ordained missionaries cannot be slaveholders. And so the Southern Baptist Convention is literally formed out of a desire for pastors to have slaves.
Mm.
There you go. Okay. And now in 2021, there are only about 1.2 million members in the American Baptist Church, and there are over 16 million members in the Southern Baptist Convention. So again, Protestant or progressive Christianity doesn't pay. Apparently, racism and conservatism does. And that's a cheap shot, but I'll take it. So that is the history of the American Baptist Church, because post Civil War,
Wow.
the Triennial Convention reforms as the Northern Baptist Convention, obviously, to distinguish from the Southern Baptist Convention, which there is no reunification. Even post Civil War, the Southern Baptist congregations and the Northern Baptist congregations do not reconcile in any way, shape, or form. There is a slight merger in 1911 where the Free Will Baptist General Conference merges with the with the Northern Baptist Convention. And I don't know what the deal with the Free Will Baptist. Oh, it's a minor movement that came out of England. One of the interesting things, and this is like, reading the writing on the wall to a certain extent, is what starting in 1838, so 7 years before the split of the Triennial Convention, you begin to have actual Black slave Baptist conventions being formed. So you have Black slave Baptist churches that are arising out of these communities. They start to organize, and you can, again, this is not a hard thing to parse, is that essentially what happens is the Southern Black churches see this as a threat to their autonomy and their ability to continue to maintain slaves, because again, if they recognize these Black churches as being part of the Triennial Convention, you can imagine the chaos that would ensue. So yeah, there's that piece as well too. So they continue to be the Northern Baptist, the Northern contingent of the Triennial continues to be the Northern Baptist Convention up until 1972. And that's when they renamed themselves to the American Baptist Convention, primarily, believe it or not, because of the Civil Rights Movement. So in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, which they, the American Baptist, what became the American Baptist Church was very involved in, and had passed. They created something called the Baptist Action for Racial Brotherhood in 1964. They were very involved in promoting Black voices during this time. One of the things that they realized was that the name Northern Baptist Convention was itself exclusionary, right? And so they reformed as the American Baptist Convention, and that's the way it's been ever since. What's interesting about the numbers is that they've been pretty much the same throughout all of history. They had about 1.2 million members in 1972. They peaked at 1.6 in the late 70s, early 80s, and they're down back to about 1.2 million again. But of course, as with all of the mainline denominations, they are experiencing slow decline with regards to numbers. So regarding their theology and practice, they're Baptists, so they believe so they hold to a believer's baptism, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, it's non-infant, so you have to be of the age of accountability. They practice communion, Lord's Supper. They're Christian, so they hold the Bible to be the source of authority. They're Trinitarian. I didn't see anything about creedal statements, but Baptist churches in general don't hold to that creedal kind of model of stuff. They ordain women. They ordain gay people. They practice marriage between same-sex couples. Keep in mind that the ABC continues to be a very congregational identity denomination. So that is not the same for every church. There is diversity within the denomination, and I'm guessing that it's probably regional. But again, in terms of where their teachings lie, they're pretty much in alignment with all the other mainline denominations regarding ordination of women and ordination of LGBT clergy. They do have an ABC USA congregation in DC ordained the first openly transgender pastor in 2013. So yeah, you know, which, well, I'm gonna jump ahead of myself, but and polity, they're congregationalist. So similar to the DOC and the UCC stuff, each church is kind of responsible for its own direction. They're organized into 33 regions across the United States, and it's geographical / population based. But there is a general board of the ABC, but their resolutions are not binding on local congregations. So in other words, it's kind of similar to the ELCA, wherein they make a statement, which is kind of a guiding statement, but each church decides how they're going to follow that. And then not coincidentally, a substantial portion of ABC USA churches are African-American churches. And again, because they're congregationally based, they have affiliations with other Baptist conventions, which are primarily Black, like the National Baptist Convention and the Progressive National Baptist Convention. They essentially have what we would refer to as full communion agreements with them. Yeah, so that's the ABC in a nutshell.
Was Martin Luther King?
No, he was a pastor in he was one of the African American denominations.
Ebenezer or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't even know. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm that. I know he wasn't an ABC, but I can't remember. It may be kind of a non-denomination, non-convention. I should know this.
It's a church. I don't know what it's called. Like, it's Ebenezer, but I don't remember the denominational, bonus words.
Well, yeah. So okay. So this is the tough thing: is that again, Baptist organization is loose in general. So he was a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was essentially a conference of independent Baptist congregations, primarily Black.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'd be curious to find out the relationship between the SCLC and the ABC historically. Mm-hmm. ABC members of note, Kamala Harris.
Oh, yeah.
Is belongs to the ABC. That's about it. No, that's not true. The Rockefellers were ABC members.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, they were NBC members before.
Right.
Sorry, it sounds like we're talking about news or television networks.
That's right.
They were members of the National Baptist Convention before it became the ABC. All right, so I had a bunch of questions, but the problem is the stuff that we've talked about that seems to be fascinating is more kind of the politics side of thing and not necessarily the theology. But here's the thing. Here's the question for us to mull over. So we've got two very interesting examples here where these two faith traditions arrive kind kind of at a similar point with regards to quote unquote politics and theology. I mean, with some differences, as with all denominations, but they arrive at it in two very different ways. So the Moravian Church, out of their desire for unity, this is what has driven them. Whereas the American Baptist Convention, their polity and their theology essentially arrives out of the conflict of splitting, over an issue like slavery. So here's my question. So now that we're, five lessons into this denominational study, what do you think of the future of denominationalism within the U.S.?
Could you define that a little bit more?
Sure, absolutely.
Denominational.
So denominationalism specifically is, in my mind, it's organization of congregations versus, quote unquote, non-denominationalism, which is this hyper-congregational lack of organization, lack of cohesive creedal or, doctrinal identity, right? Which is an illusion. And I've talked about this before, because in reality, if you look at like American evangelicalism, which identifies itself primarily as non-denominational, in reality, they all share a similar theology, which comes out of their educational root. But for me, the significance of denominationalism is this public profession of we are unified in these ideas, and here we stand. Here, this is who we are, as opposed to kind of hiding behind. Sorry, this is very biased language, but in my mind, hiding behind the refusal to affiliate. So do you think there's a future?
I'll kind of go back. I think I go back to my mental picture of a cup of tea. The tea being the heart of the matter, and the cup being the boundaries. And denominational, in some ways, I like boundaries.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to divide, but to sort of like, the question for me sometimes is more important than the answer, to know what the other cups are, and to have some idea of what. Anyway, I think there'll always be a case whether how many people decide they like boundaries or not boundaries. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jill, you got your or Jill, then Susan.
Susan, sorry.
You go.
Oh,
No, go ahead,
sorry,
Jill.
sorry. I have no soothsayer crystal ball thing, but I'm getting super happier about denominationalism through this conversation, series. I'll tell you why. So Baptists also come out of a very strenuous, like, nothing papist. Like they're
Baptists and Missouri Synod Lutherans.
Super big deal.
Yeah.
And so their entire formation had a lot to do with an oppositional approach. Anything that had a whiff of sacrament was a problem. They had to change that to ordinances because that was less papist. And so it's not theoretically surprising that you would have a north and south split, and they would be like, oh, we're just used to this. Like, not only do I want slaves, but this is what we do. Like, we're just going to be oppositional. And the congregational nature of them is sort of like that as well, is if you drive through the North Carolina back areas, non-metro areas, you're driving in the middle of nowhere, and there's 17 signs for different Baptist churches. And why are there 17? Because the minute somebody has a disagreement, They just make a new church, and there's like 5 people over here, 5 people over there. It's sort of in their DNA. So I can kind of get behind that thinking, but a friend of mine who's a Baptist minister, acquaintance, probably too strong to call him a friend, talks about, because they have shed themselves of so many things, that they have nothing left within the faith. They don't have anyone to tell them their sins are forgiven. They don't have rites of passage of saying you're confirmed. They don't have the moment of taking first communion. They don't even have much behind communion. The only thing they've got left, one thing, that's it, is baptism.
Believer's baptism. Yeah.
And so the thing about denominations strikes me as at least it's hanging on to something, rather than being compelled to shedding of things. And I think that is a dichotomy that means that denominationalism will at least have a communal conception rather than a individual conception. And this is where I've landed by this week. Didn't have that thought last week, have it now.
Thank you. No, that's good. Yeah, Susan, you're.
Oh, I was just thinking that, it seems like the trend today is for people to say they're spiritual and not religious, meaning that their religion, that they're not tied to any one denomination. But, I think that it's going to go that way for a while, and then it's going to switch back to people wanting more structure especially as like our children have families and want to develop community and have connections and things like that. And I think that people are going to become more aligned with denominations again, but I think there's going to be a long time when people just kind of try different things.
It's an interesting thought, especially since if you look at the Puritan movement, theology aside, that's essentially what happens, is that all these folks that flee the UK, flee the Church of England, are coming over because they don't want to be beholden to what they see as oppressive bureaucracy and hierarchy. And so, the origins of many of these movements is like, we're going to establish this place where we can worship how we want to worship. We don't have to be beholden to a state or to a hierarchy. But then, as you say, the pendulum swings back the other way. Susan.
Are you familiar with James Dobson? Or
yes,
is
family
he
first, family first, or family matters, or something like that. I can't remember.
Focus
in the Family.
Dare to Discipline was a book he wrote in the 70s, and we attended with some friends in Baker. I think it was a Baptist church, and I nearly ran out during the sermon because it was something about children are born full of the devil, and it's up to the parents to beat it out of them.
Yep.
And so is Dobson Baptist, or is that a different?
Nah, well, he identifies. This is, I get a kick out of this language because it's so, anyways, he is a nominally an American evangelical Christian, whatever that means.
Whatever that means. Okay.
But yes, he's a Baptist.
Yeah.
The Southern Baptists have common cause with his movement, but he is not, per se Southern Baptist.
So sorry, I just Googled him because I want. So his parents were actually Nazarene folks, Church of the Nazarene, which that's one we haven't covered yet. But they come out of the holiness movement. So Nadia Boltz Weber, that's where her family came out of, was the Church of the Nazarene holiness movement, which I mean, doesn't surprise me a whole lot, because at the core of it is like, you know, the no dancing, no having fun, no. I'm mocking it to a certain extent, but that's, you know, this idea that there's a right way to behave and you have to toe that party line. And so, but what Dobson does essentially is Dobson is a business person, I would argue, primarily, potentially maybe a pastor 14th or 15th. And his, I mean, because the dude, by the way, is not an ordained pastor. He's a psychologist that became famous for Focus on the Family and these very biblically, and I'm again using scare quotes, biblically centered family governing approaches. And here's one of the things to keep in mind is that, you know, Jill already pointed out. So what you see, especially in the South of the United States, is you continue to see, despite the fact that the SBC is the largest Protestant denomination officially in the United States, there are as many or more churches who are spin-offs of the SBC as there are SBC churches, because Southern Christianity is its own thing. And I would make the argument that American evangelicalism is simply the evolutionary successor to the SBC, if that makes sense.
Heartedly, I buy that premise.
Yeah. So here, let me throw in a couple more, nuggets into this. So guess what year the SBC peaks in membership? Throw a number out there.
If it wasn't right after the 60s, like 1970, it was right after the gay marriage thing. Like boom.
2006. 2006, the Southern Baptist Convention peaks at 16,600,000 membership. Okay. Prior to this, so they had started to I'm not making this stuff up. It comes out of essentially homosexuality, where in 1965 they've only got 10 million members. In 1995 they got 15 million. So it's literally the 1980s that causes a major spike in SBC membership, and they peaked in 2006, and they're down to about 14.5 million now in 2021. Jill.
I'll put James Dobson fits in right with this and what you just said. So I will put something in the chat. It's a couple of links of some stuff, but here's kind of how they came about this sort of mentality. So we have to evangelize, right? And the South has a bunch of like, people keep changing our culture. Like the North has their own thing, they do their own thing, and then it keeps invading us. Yep. And so the South was like, everything is cool. Kingdom of God is working for us. Uh-oh, culture is shifting. The kingdom of God is breaking up. So,
AKA black people are allowed to vote.
Yeah, like what happened? Yeah. So they came upon the concept, generally speaking, that fighting a culture war is what evangelism looks like. Like this is what, being a disciple is fighting culture wars. Yeah. Because if you can create the culture in a oppositional and fighty kind of way, you are bringing the kingdom of God to America. Yep. And so this is a very peculiar point of view that creates a lot of this, growth. So, I mean, that's basically it.
And just a couple more facts, and it's almost 11:15, so we should probably wrap up soon, but just a couple more facts, number one, regarding trends of membership within the Southern Baptist Convention. Not that the SBC is necessarily indicative of American evangelicalism and conservative in general, but I think it is a kind of a good marker. So their major increases in membership occur right around the 1960s. So they jump from 1950, they only got 7 million membership. By 1980, they've got 13.7 million. Okay. Then the next jump is from 1980 to essentially post HIV AIDS, post, LGBTQ stuff. And the one that we're forgetting around there is 1970, when women start to be ordained. Okay, so here's the fast. This is one of my favorite facts. So 2 years before Roe versus Wade, I'm not making this stuff up. 2 years before Roe versus Wade, the Southern Baptist Convention puts out a statement pro-abortion. Hold on. It's 1971. The SBC passes a resolution supporting abortion, not only in cases of rape or incest, but also as clear evidence of severe fatal deformity and likelihood of damage to emotional, mental, and physical health of the mother. 1971. 1974, they affirmed the same resolution. Okay, so a year after Roe versus Wade. But then guess what happens in 1975 is you get this huge split between the moderate conservative parts of the SBC. And what ends up happening is essentially the conservative wins over, and then it's a downward slide from there. I mean, my language, it's a downward slide from there, wherein that becomes, and again, we've talked about this in the past, that becomes the gravitating issue uniting conservative Christianity and especially in the southern states going forward. Okay, here's the last piece I wanted to drop before we check off for today. So 2020, so less than 1 year ago, there was a huge break off of African American churches who had continued to remain in the SBC, specifically over the SBC's refusal to recognize critical race theory.
Yeah, that's a big issue, right? Yeah.
2020.
Yeah, from there, someone not being given tenure.
Oh my gosh. Last rant is in my mind, what you see happening essentially is that it's just this coagulation of like, you were saying, Jill, of issues that people see as being culture war. And I would argue, since I asked the question, is that what we're actually seeing, the problem is we're looking at this as mainline Protestant, aka progressive Christianity versus conservative Christianity. That's not actually it at all. It's the people that are leaving religion in general versus conservative Christianity. We're not even in this game. We are innocent bystanders. The real culture war in America right now is people leaving religion versus conservative Christianity. We just happen to be watching from the roadside. That's my, and then throw Catholicism in there, to mix things up a little bit. Okay. Sorry, it's 11:18. We ran a little bit over today, but this stuff, I find this stuff so interesting. I should have done these in two separate conversations. Quick vote. So we've got one more class next week before we have our in-person worship on the 6th. And I plan on picking it up again on the 13th and continuing through probably up to the end of June. And then I'll kind of see where things go from there. How do you want to round it out? I had talked about doing like Jehovah's Witness, LDS, that stuff. Are there any things that have come up in our conversations that you would like to look into denominational wise that we haven't covered?
Did you talk about Seventh-day Adventists?
Have not. I'll write that one down. That's actually a good one because that's kind of like a happy medium between.
Right down the street.
Yeah. There's one on Barber just down the, just, you know, a couple
good.
miles away from me.
Also, Christian Scientist. Church of
Oh,
Christ
yeah. Oh, good one. Where did my pen go? I think my dog did it. Oh, no. Here we go.
You had made a reference to what you called parachurches.
Yeah. So like,
I don't know
parachurch
what that,
organizations like St. Vincent's, Salvation Army, that kind of stuff we could look at as well too. That we could probably do that in one session.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, what constitutes a parachurch and what are the various things, you know, various names that happen to be parachurches? That might be a good subject in and of itself if there's a lot of things that are parachurches.
Maybe that would
Did
be
you
like,
also talk?
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was wondering, have you also talked about, you know, the Mennonites and the Amish and the Hutterites?
No, that was one, that was
descendants of
one,
Anabaptists?
that
We're
was,
going through 2022 now.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, if we don't get too into detail on the Mennonite Amish stuff, we can, I think we can, so I think we can do, because, okay, hold on. So let me look at my dates here. So we got 30th, the 13th, and the 20th, and I might be gone the 27th. I think we can fit a solid 3 sessions in that we could potentially even pick up in August if we had more left over. But I'm going to propose that we do one Sunday on Seventh-day Adventist, Jehovah's Witness, LDS, since they kind of share a bunch of stuff. We do one Sunday on the Mennonite Amish, which again is reductionist, but we're pressed for time. And then the final Sunday we do parachurch organizations. Does that sound good?
Science?
And Christians, yeah, Christian Science, yeah.
Okay.
I want to toss in one last little piece since we were talking about the SBC. New news last week, the guy that was running the ethics thing, his name was it's not Roger Moore, it's Robert Moore.
James Bond?
I know. So there's Alan Moore, he's the head of the SBC, and there's Robert Moore. Anyway, he was like trying to get people all not Trumpy about being Southern Baptist. He announced that he's going to leave his post and go over and be a director of public theologians for Christianity Today magazine.
Being anti-Trump right now is not a successful full path for any conservative. Yeah.
Yeah, he took it hard. He took it hard on the chin there.
Oh, sorry.
What's his name? It's R.
I don't
Moore.
know.